A few years ago, there was a best-selling book. Maybe some of you have heard of it or even read it. It was by Richard Carlson, and it was called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. And it's all small stuff. A very popular book that no doubt has meant a lot to a great many people. The introduction to the book states that its purpose is to make you appreciate being alive, to keep your emotions in proper perspective, and to cherish other people as the unique miracles they are. Don't sweat the small stuff. I imagine we all wish we could do a little bit better at not sweating the small stuff. But there's a question in my mind raised by the subtitle, and it's all small stuff. I wonder, is it really all small stuff? Or is some stuff small and other stuff really big? Just the other day, I noticed in one of our bathrooms upstairs that the door stopper behind the door had come a little loose, and so it was tilted downwards a little bit. And because it had tilted downwards, the horizontal distance between the end of the stopper and the wall was less. And one time, the bathroom door, I guess, had been opened a little too quickly, and with that decreased distance between the end of the stopper and the wall, the handle had put a little hole in the drywall. And I thought to myself, I don't have the time or the energy to patch a hole in the wall at the moment. Well, that's maybe small stuff. We probably could all agree that on a normal day, while it might be a minor irritant, it's really not worth losing sleep over a little nick or hole in the wall. But what if you were to, say, lose your job and not know how to pay your mortgage? Would that also be small stuff? Is some stuff small and other stuff really rightly big? And how do we tell the difference? Where's the line between small stuff and big stuff? The Apostle Paul, I think, helps us understand that question. Dick read so well and explained so beautifully Paul's chapter 8 in his first letter to the Corinthians. And there he addressed a question which was of pressing concern to the Christians in Corinth. And that was, can a Christian rightly eat meat that has been sacrificed to an idol or not? Now, of course, that particular question is of no real relevance to us today. It's not a question that any of us would ask or care about. But the principle that Paul uses in coming up with an answer to that question is a principle which can be very helpful for us in answering our own questions about what is small stuff and what is big stuff. For one thing, Paul said that knowledge is small stuff, while love is big stuff. In his letter, he said, knowledge puffs up, while love builds up. I find it interesting that right before saying that, he had told the Corinthians that we have all knowledge. I guess it's easy to be gracious when you're speaking from a position of strength. But his point was a good one. Knowledge can so easily puff us up, while love builds others up. Quite a few years ago now, When my brother graduated from university, all of our extended family got together at a nice restaurant, and we had a lovely meal and celebration together in the back room of the restaurant. And I remember on that occasion, the fellow who was waiting on us was really chatty and outgoing. He was wanting to have a conversation almost every time something else was brought to the table. And when he found out we were there to celebrate a university graduation, he wanted to take the conversation in a really intellectual direction. Every time some drink refills would come, he would want to talk about something very academic. And I think he had a Greek background, and he was really interested in philosophy, and he started taking the conversation in the direction of all these ancient Greek philosophers and how helpful they were. And at one point, he told us, philosophy is such a wonderful discipline. It's the discipline that explains all the other disciplines. And I'd had about enough of this guy. And so I said to him, well, actually, I disagree. I think theology is the most important discipline. And that put an end to the conversation. Now, I know that I was kind of right. Theologians have often referred to their subject as the queen of the sciences. Karl Barth, the Swiss theologian in the last century, argued so powerfully that if you haven't reckoned with the revelation of God in Jesus, you just can't understand the world as it really is. If you haven't tried to wrestle with the idea that the creator of the universe might take on human form to show love for us and to bring us into relationship, then any understanding of the world you will have has a major hole in it. Now, when I told that gentleman that I think theology is the most important discipline, unfortunately, I wasn't telling him that so that he might gain a sense of God's love for him. I was telling him so that he would stop talking. And in a way, put him in his place. Knowledge puffs us up. Love builds others up. Perhaps many of us have known those kinds of folks who are know-it-alls, know everything about everything. And it's really annoying. We don't often like to be around know-it-alls. By the same token, we also know those people who have wonderful love, those people who are loving in almost everything they do. And what a blessing those people are. It's because we know from our own experience that so easily knowledge can puff us up, while love builds others up. Another thing Paul wanted us to know is that what we eat is small stuff, while our relationship with God is big stuff. Paul said to the Corinthians, there are many so-called gods and lords, but we know that in truth there is only one God, the creator of everything, and there is one Lord, Jesus the Messiah. And so he went on to say, meat from an animal that has been sacrificed to an idol, to one of these so-called gods or lords, is really nothing. When someone has tried to make this sacrifice, nothing has happened. Meat sacrificed to an idol is no different from any other kind of meat. He might have said it this way. There's another word for meat sacrificed to an idol, and that is meat. It's nothing. And whether you eat it or not doesn't matter. God couldn't care less. And then he concludes, in any case, what we eat or don't eat neither brings us into relationship with God or keeps us apart from relationship with God. It just has nothing to do with that at all. Now, you may think to yourself, well, of course, I agree that's what I think. But that is quite contrary to lots of different worldviews or religious systems, in particular the Jewish faith from which Paul had come. In some religions or worldviews, what you eat is of primary importance to your religious faith and even to your relationship with God. In one religious system that a good friend of mine follows, one is not even really meant to have a cup of coffee. I can't imagine having a United Church without a cup of coffee. It's almost an essential part of our religious practice to have church and then go for coffee. It was the German philosopher Feuerbach who first coined the phrase that we now know as you are what you eat. Now that may be true of, say, our health and well-being. Certainly if we eat healthier, we're going to be healthier than we otherwise would be, or vice versa. Perhaps you could stretch that analogy to other areas of life. But it is not true of our relationship with God, our Maker. You see, as Paul said, what we eat does not commend us to God or bring us into relationship with God. Jesus, the Messiah, crucified and risen, and our faith in him is what commends us to God and brings us into relationship with our Maker. Another thing Paul wanted us to know is that being right is small stuff. Right relationships with our Christian brothers and sisters is big stuff. Paul had wanted to make it very clear that there was no spiritual significance to eating meat that had been sacrificed to an idol. Go ahead and eat it, he said. God doesn't care. But if there is any chance that one of your Christian brothers and sisters who is perhaps new to the faith or uncertain in their faith, or who lacks the kind of logical reasoning or understanding that Paul has argued for, and that person sees you eating meat that has been sacrificed to an idol, and therefore comes to the conclusion, however mistaken, that this whole idol worship thing isn't a big deal, then you should not eat the meat that has been sacrificed to an idol. In other words, God has given tremendous freedom in this area of life. However, if in exercising this freedom you create a stumbling block in the faith journey of your Christian brother or sister, then do not exercise that freedom. Throughout the ages, I think Christians have often been guilty of reversing this priority. Very often, Christians have seen it as more important to be right than to be in right relationships with their faith brothers and sisters. In one of the previous churches where I served, I was at a board meeting, and our board met in the basement of that little country church. And during this board meeting, an argument broke out between two of the members over who had the right or permission to touch the water heater, which was also in the basement. And an incredible argument broke out between the two of them over this. If they'd been a little younger, it might have turned into a fist fight. One of them even stormed out of the meeting, all over who had the right to fix the broken water heater. I liked both of them. Both great guys with wonderful characteristics. Put them together in a church and give them a silly issue to fight over and fireworks. This past Monday, we had our first meeting of the walking club. Tremendously successful, in my opinion. About 15 people came, and everyone seemed to enjoy it. And I came down at 9 a.m. and walked around the gym for 10 or 15 minutes. And I wasn't sure if the gym was really big enough to walk around, but it was quite fine. And I'd walked for a little bit, and then I went upstairs to do some work, and then I came back around 9:45. And I was surprised, the group had divided into two. At one table were those drinking coffee, and at the other end of the room, a smaller group had gathered around the teapot. And I said, well, here you go. You bring people to church, and 45 minutes later, there's a schism. Tongue-in-cheek, of course. Everyone was getting along, but the fact that we can laugh about that makes us realize that Christians so often have the tendency to insist on being right rather than being on right relationships with their Christian brothers and sisters. Thursday night in my normal week is usually the time when I do most of my preparing for the Sunday sermon. I put the kids to bed and then go down and sit at my computer and work as long as I have to get something ready for today, which then I can spend the rest of the week refining. Well, this past Thursday, in the afternoon, some friends of mine had an extra ticket to the Barrie Colts game and then asked if I would like to go. I had to think about that for a second. I really wanted to go, but if I do go, then it'll really put me behind the 8 ball for my sermon. Well, I thought about it for a moment and decided that, yes, I would like to go with them to the hockey game. And I went to the hockey game, but I took with me some notes folded up in my pocket and a pen so that I could work on my sermon during the intermission. And so during the first intermission, I pulled out my notes and my pen, and my friends were ministers. They said, what are you doing? I said, I'm working on my sermon. And boy, I didn't hear the end of it. My one friend on the left even texted his wife to say, can you believe this guy? And of course, I was kind of telling them a little bit about what I wanted to say and bouncing some ideas off them. And here they said, here is a classic case of sweating the small stuff. Here you are, hanging out with your friends, and you're thinking about work. You need to stop and smell the roses. What is small stuff not to be sweated? And what is big stuff that should be sweated? Paul said, acquiring knowledge that will puff you up is small stuff. Loving others to build them up is big stuff. Worrying about the spiritual consequences of the food you eat is small stuff. Your relationship with the living God is big stuff. Being right, so that you might even have the ability to prove others wrong, is very often small stuff. Being in right relationships with your Christian brothers and sisters, even when at times you may disagree, that's big stuff. Thanks be to God. Amen.